Hey, welcome back to the Zombie Tactics channel. You know, it seems to me I've lost track of the shotgun series. Where the hell did that ever go? Well, we're back today. I think last time I threatened or promised to start talking about shells and how they're constructed and pattern some shells out and something like that. So today we're going to talk about shell construction, and I've got a few things to show you here on the table here next to me. I've got some buckshot of varying kinds. I've got number 4 buck and double-aught buck, that's 00 buck from Noble Law Enforcement. I've got some Federal Power Shock, and I'll show a pick as well, buckshot, 2 3/4 inch Magnum buckshot shells. So those are kind of the standard shotgun shells we'd use for anti-zombie or self-defense purposes. I've also got a Federal rifled slug that I'll be taking apart and showing you how it's put together. And then I want to show you a couple of specialty shells that are kind of useful. One of those being the Federal Flight Control Premium Law Enforcement buckshot. And these work great, and you'll see that later in another video when I pattern these out on a target. But I want to take them apart and show you how they're constructed. And then these things have received a lot of attention. The Centurian Multi-Defense buckshot shells. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take them apart after a brief discussion of basic shotgun shell construction, and let's see what they're made of and how that'll affect what they'll be able to do for us in our self-defense or anti-zombie purposes. So let's go to the tabletop and see what we're talking about. So do me a favor today and pay no attention to my hands if they're kind of a mess. I've been blooding some guns, if you've seen that video. The basic parts of the shotgun shell, kind of blown up here on the diagram, are as follows. The primer, which is this little area right here, where the firing pin will strike, and that has a small explosive charge on the other end of it that will then set off the charge, or the gunpowder, that's sitting in about this area of the shell. And above that is what's some wadding, and that'll be made of everything from a piece of cardboard to felt, sometimes a plastic insert of some kind. And then above that, you'll have whatever the payload is, which in this case we're showing pellets. So that'll be where your shot would go, your double-aught, or your number 4 shot, or whatever you've got in there, any specialty thing you have happening. And that could also be, anything, a slug, whatever, that kind of thing. Plastic casing on the outside, a kind of a tough plastic casing with crimping at the front in the case of shot, and it'll be open in the case of a slug, because the slug itself can hold that case together. And you can see how that's kind of crimped at the end there to hold it together. This is the Federal double-aught buck we're taking a look at here. On the outside here, this is what we'll typically call the brass or the head of the shell. And then the rim or the lip of the cartridge, you can see that kind of there. That's what your ejector will grab onto when it strips the round out of the chamber. So those are the basic parts of a shotgun shell, and we'll now go ahead and take apart some of them so that you can see how that works in actual practice. Okay, so opening up the Federal 2 3/4 inch Magnum Federal Power Shock shell, we can see a couple of little differences here in the basic shell design. One of them is you've got this buffering material, which in this case are these little plastic pellets. And buffering material can be anything from talcum powder to flour or anything really, but it serves the purpose of making the shells spread out more consistently, or I should say the pellets spread out more consistently as they come out of the tube. Here you can see we've got another little innovation called a shot cup that many manufacturers use, and this keeps all the rounds together as they come out of the tube, so that when shortly after they fly out of the tube, this shot cup will fly open on its own, and then the shells will come, the pellets will come flying out. And here's your standard double-aught pellet, of which we have 9 in this particular configuration. The wadding here is in a place where I'm having a hard time getting a hold of it, but you can see that it's a plastic configuration here. See if I can grab that and pull it. I may have to pry that out of there with a knife or something. it's not really going to come out easily. Here we go. That is a plastic wad or a plastic divider, and then behind that you can see pretty plainly that, ladies and gentlemen, is the powder. And it's funny how these are these little discs of gunpowder that are in there, and that's the actual boom part of this association. And that's the Federal Power Shock double-aught buck shell and the construction of that shell. Now, in the case of the Noble Sport law enforcement buckshot, this is the number 4 version of it. We've got a little bit different design here, and that is, instead of crimping the end with that kind of pedal design, we've got an interesting shell design where they're using a paper divider, cardboard it looks like, at the end here. We'll go ahead and take this apart and see how it looks on the inside. Okay, so let's open this up, and you'll see that it's a little different. We've got this cardboard insert at the front, and I've got number 4 shot here. In this case, what do I got? 27 pellets worth of number 4 sized shot. Quite a bit smaller. Again, a plastic wadding. This one comes out a little easier. And then the gunpowder, if I can get it to come out of here. You can kind of see that, some of it coming out. Let's get a knife in here and pry it out. It looks like it's a little bit more tightly packed in the Noble rounds. And there you go with that. So that's the Noble Sport number 4 buckshot. So, with the Federal Power Shock rifled slug, a pretty standard slug, you'll note, as I talked about earlier, the slug itself is what kind of seals the end of the crimped end of the shell. So there doesn't have to be any kind of pedaling or little insert or anything like that to keep the slug in there. Let's take that one apart and see what it looks like inside. Slugs are in some ways actually the simplest of all designs. Look at that. There's your rifled slug, and the rifling on the side of the slug is there because in a smooth bore barrel on a shotgun, you don't have rifling in the barrel, so you rifle the slug instead. And this is what gives it a twist that allows it to fly, more true and have greater accuracy. That's a pretty hefty slug there. You don't want to get hit with that. That's the equivalent of like a 60 caliber bullet in some ways. So we'll throw that there. And then just look at that, a big honkin' wad made of plastic here in this case, and the all-important gunpowder. That's the Federal rifled slug, a pretty standard rifled slug design. Moving on to the Federal Premium Law Enforcement Ammunition. This is a kind of buckshot. This is double-aught buck, and it's kind of a specialty round owing to this thing called a flight control wad. And this flight control wad allows you to have, I'd say, both greater accuracy as well as the shot hanging together for longer downrange, so it doesn't fly out as much. It patterns much more tightly than the more typical buckshot rounds that I've shown you so far. Let's go ahead and take one apart and see what that looks like. I should mention that just because this says law enforcement on the box and tactical on the shell itself, there's nothing about this that makes this illegal to own. There's no official designation for law enforcement ammunition or anything like that, so don't let that scare you. Again, we've got this plastic powdered material here that is the buffering that helps the shot stick together a little better. In this case, we've got either a copper or a copper-coated shot, which is a little harder. That might make it penetrate a little better. And we've got this interesting, let me see if I can get it apart here, this interesting situation here where the wadding and what would normally be a shot cup are put together as one unit. We'll get back to that in a second. There's the gunpowder, and set that aside. And we've got the 9 pellets of copper, or copper-coated at least, double-aught buckshot. That would be the payload of this shell. Now, what's interesting about this shell as opposed to others is that you might be able to see the scoring at the end here. And what this is designed to do is, as this comes out of the end of the barrel, this will create these little wing-like structures because it's being blown out the end of the barrel, and you'll get a number of them. And what this does is it slows down the shot cup aerodynamically. Focus. You can imagine those all being out. I'm going to go ahead and stop the camera and move them all out so you can get a better picture of that. And there we go. You can see how that kind of almost makes it look like, just like on the box, kind of like a little mini missile. And that kind of is the idea. It controls the rate at which the shot cup will release the shot from the cup, much more controlled fashion. So all the shot hangs together for greater distance going down line. Out to several feet, this essentially is a slug because everything is still sitting in the cup and it will impact all at once. And then, gradually the aerodynamics will slow this shot cup out and the shot will begin to separate, almost like a rocket ship type maneuver. And so it hangs together more further down range, and that way it gives you excellent tight patterning. Really great design on Federal's part, the Federal Flight Control buckshot. And then finally, a specialty round, Centurion multi-defense buckshot. You've got 6 rounds of #1 buckshot and a .65 caliber ball sitting in the middle of that. Kind of a crazy round. Let's take a look at that one. So opening this one up, we'll see that we've got an interesting kind of a really flimsy shot cup and wad situation holding it together, similar to what we had with the Federal Flight Control round, except it doesn't really quite work the same way. And inside of this, check out what you've got. You've got a .65 caliber ball. Oh my lord. And then 6 rounds of buckshot. And of course the gunpowder, which is oddly green colored in this case. This round, I'll tell you what, if a few rounds of this will not solve your problem, I think you need to immediately dust off and nuke the site from orbit, in the words of Ellen Ripley. And so goes the cutaway of several basic shot shell designs. All the shot shells that I think are useful, at least the type of shells that are useful for self-defense and anti-zombie purposes. In the next installment in the shotgun series, I'll actually be out at a range shooting some shotguns and show you how these things pattern, as well as how they might, blow up some stuff if we're lucky. That's Zombie Tactics for today, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Here's where the awkward pause goes.